Okay, so this is just a little PowerPoint about information gathering. Information gathering is one of the problem-focused coping strategies that a lot of people use. You find out about something or a problem that you don't know very much about, and then you go see what you can find out about it. And that's actually oftentimes really, really good. Um, the problem is, of course, like many things, it sometimes backfires. And so this PowerPoint is to talk to you about how that backfires and what normally happens. And I'll give you a lead in for that, which is that what happens is that sometimes we get so caught up in information gathering, we don't remember to make sure that the information that we gather is reliable, credible information. So these next couple of slides are just going to talk about how to avoid that. Okay, so we just said the problem when we're information gathering, really the only way typically that it backfires is that we get information that's not credible, and so that's what we're looking for. We're looking for good information. We want it to be accurate. We want it to be unbiased. We want it to be something that we can trust, and there's so much information out there. I'd say sometimes one of the problems that we run into is just having too much information available, which just makes this process of being able to make sure that we're finding accurate, reliable information is so much more important even maybe than it used to be. So there are two main rules for doing this. One is avoiding bias, and we're going to talk about one kind of bias here in the next couple of slides, but that's also what your Harvard Business Review article is about, and a couple other things. So avoiding bias, we'll talk about that more, and then evaluating your source, and we'll talk about that one more too. Okay, so the primary bias that we're going to talk about avoiding is confirmation bias. There are about a billion different kind of biases, and it would just take books and books and an entire class to talk about all of these. But confirmation bias, I would say, is the one that gets us the most, and it's the tendency to get new information, but to interpret it in a way that it confirms what you already thought. And one of the problems is that when we have a stressor, what we are already thinking is typically not good stuff, like this is hopeless, or I can't do this, or things like that, which means that if we get information and we just interpret it straight into that kind of theory that we already have, it's just going to sort of spiral us down rather than actually, serving a problem focused goal, So I'm going to give you a little example of this, which is really funny. When I was, shortly after I had my first child, and I was nursing. Part of the background of the story that you need to know is that I don't like to exercise, and so what I wanted to do, honestly, was I said I wanted to look up and see if new moms who are breastfeeding should be exercising. And I honestly didn't really want to know. So I was already violating this first tip, which is to start with a clean desire to actually get information. You don't have to have that. If you don't have that, if you know that you're biased, I was definitely biased in that circumstance. That's okay. It's just that I didn't need information gathering. I should have just done a different strategy. And so what I did was I got on Google, and I just kept not. I kept looking for the wrong things. So I violated this third tip, which is searching with open-ended questions, because I was definitely asking. When I typed in my Google search, I started out typing in very open sorts of things like breastfeeding and exercise, but I kept sort of not seeing what I wanted to see. This is a very extreme example of confirmation bias, by the way. It's usually much sneakier than this, and eventually I just sort of put in exercise bad for breastfeeding. So that really didn't get me the information. I put bias into my search for information by doing that. And then, so rather than asking this question that you see here in the second tip, which is, how might I be wrong? Um, I was asking myself, I was asking other people, I was asking the internet, am I right? Aren't I right? I feel sure that this is not a good idea for me to be exercising, so I think I won't. And it's an especially good example because I did, after pages and pages of Google searching, find one very unreliable source, just a random person on a discussion board who said, yeah, I didn't think it was a good idea either. And I promptly shut down my browser and went about my business. And that was honestly just a lot of wasted energy that I didn't need to waste because I wasn't going to do it. If you want to learn more about confirmation bias, this down here at the bottom is just a fun little activity that's usually used in social psychology classes to talk about this. So you don't have to, but just if you want to, click on it and see what it does for you. Okay, so we're going to continue with this. If I sound a little different today or anything seems different, it's because I did the narration on the other slides on one day and I'm picking this up again today, so bear with me. So we're talking about information gathering, and information gathering necessarily means that we are going to other sources to find stuff out. And so we might be using informational sources, that's what I'm going to call it, informational sources, which would be things like books or research articles, preferably. Let's tell the truth. Most of us, when we want to know something, just go to Google. So the internet too, and all it has to offer, good and bad. And the other kind of sources I'm going to call personal sources. So this is anybody that you consider to be a trusted other. So it might be an actual mental health professional like a counselor, it might be friends, might be family. Anytime you're going to go to a person for information. And I want to talk to you about how to evaluate these because, the information that you get, if you're going to do information gathering, should preferably be good information, right? That's what we're talking about. And that information is only as good, as knowledgeable, as unbiased as its source. So we've talked a little bit about you avoiding bias and things like confirmation bias, and now we're going to talk about your actual sources. All right, so this is, as you can see, it's from the Santa Barbara City College Writing Center. I just thought it was nice, kind of way to evaluate sources. And so this is from a college website, which means mostly what it's looking at is if you were going to do a research paper, what would qualify, right, as being a scholarly source. And trust me, this is good information for the rest of your graduate career if you're going to be in it too. So I'm hopeful that this list makes sense for you in your own life, that you wouldn't only look for scholarly or highly credible sources writing a paper for school, but even probably more importantly in your own life, that you would be looking for scholarly, credible sources for information that's actually important to you. So let's go through some of these. Credibility. How do you know that the information in the author are authentic and reliable? And for this, we're talking about informational kinds of sources. So here, be thinking about books, about journal articles, and about the internet, right? So credibility. How do you know the information and author are authentic and reliable? So what is the publishing or sponsoring organization? This is a big deal. One of the main ways that it's kind of sneaky and awful, right? But a lot of times, if somebody wants to sell you something, the best way they can do that is to appear to be a very credible source. And while you might be attuned to that for something like, hey, this is a diet pill, we probably want to be checking on all of our sources. So who puts this out? What is their what's their background, right? What are the author's credentials? Is this a person who even knows anything about this? I get very tired of clients, of students coming up and saying, oh, I found this great book about, raising a kid with ADHD. Who's it written by? A mom with a kid who has ADHD. Like, that person, I'm sure, has very interesting and valuable information about what happened in her life with her kid, in her family, but that does not really entitle her to write a book that would be used as a source for teaching people about that. So, what are their credentials? Are they an authority on the subject? And really, there should always be a way to get in contact with that person. If there's not, you might sort of be a little bit more skeptical about it. Accuracy. How do you know the information is up to date, factual, detailed, and comprehensive? So sometimes you've had this happen where you're doing a paper for school and people say, only articles from the last 5 years or only articles from the last 10 years. And often that's a very good thing, right? You don't probably want to have, 20-year-old information about something like cultural awareness or a medical condition or something like that. You probably want the most up-to-date information that there is. Let's say sometimes what happens is in the scientific literature, topics kind of go in and out of fashion. So for example, starting around 2005, 2007-ish, we just all of a sudden started doing, it just got very trendy because it got a lot of popular attention, doing a lot of research on autism spectrum disorder. That means that some of the best research that's out there actually is from around 2007, and if somebody had given you a deadline of only 5 years, you'd be missing a lot. So I want to encourage you about that too. Often we want information that is the newest, but sometimes the newest information isn't the best, especially if something got a lot of research at one time and then kind of fell off the map a little bit. Does the information that you are reading agree with other sources? Now, it probably shouldn't agree entirely, but if you look at the body of literature on something, you should really see a lot of similarities. If you run across, one person who says exactly the opposite of what, 10 other reputable sources say, you probably need to take another look at it, the methodology or something like that. Is the information that you are getting, is it logically consistent, right? Does it contradict itself? Marketers and stuff, they're really, really, really good at just drawing your attention wherever they would like it to be. And so this is a place where you just sort of have to be aware of yourself, if you summarize that information on your own, does it still make sense? And then how is it relevant? Because it's also really easy. This is one of the easiest pitfalls of information gathering, is that we just kind of go off on related sidetracks, and then we get overwhelmed, right? Being overwhelmed is one of the big problems that we have with information gathering, especially now because we have so much information available, and it can get very easy. And in fact, we tend to do that in accordance with whatever our biases are. So for example, if you're already nervous about something and then you're looking it up, you're more likely to get distracted by other stuff that seems bad or threatening. And then you're going to fill your whole brain up with all of this stuff and get on all of these side trails about, stuff that's not even really related. And all of a sudden you were pretty sure that maybe, you'd gotten diagnosed with diabetes, and all of a sudden now you're sure you have stomach cancer, and I know for sure you've done this at some point, right? Doing a symptom check or something like that. So making sure you're staying targeted. Open, like we talked about, to avoid confirmation bias, but targeted to whatever it is that you actually need information about. Reasonableness. So how do you know the information is fair, objective, moderate, consistent? This is where we really want to take another look at bias. Does the author or the publisher of this information have a stake in it? When you are looking at literature, even peer-reviewed journal articles and stuff like that, don't let that trick you into thinking that these people, you should just believe everything that they say. You might not, if you haven't had a research methods course, be able to look at their methodology and identify concerns in it, but you certainly can do things like read the limitations and make sure that they are, listing reasonable things, make sure that who they're studying makes sense for the conclusions that they're drawing. And there's a very important piece, where at the bottom, right before the references, at the end of any journal article, there should be a statement that says either there is or is not a financial conflict of interest, or if there is, for example, they got funding from a certain group, that should be listed. If it's not listed at all, you probably have a problem. And then if it is listed, you want to check and see what that relationship is, because a lot of times people will do research, but they're going to do it because they're getting money from a certain group, and they coincidentally find exactly what that group needs them to find. So I just don't want you to be, and that's even in the peer-reviewed scientific literature, right? Which is probably still the most, reliable, accurate, credible information that you can get. This is 100% more true when we're talking about things like just the internet. And then another thing sort of to check here is the information balanced? A research article should discuss its certain population. It should discuss limitations. Limitations aren't a problem. Having a strong limitations section in your research article is actually a really good thing. It lets you know that the authors really are committed to you knowing how far to take the information. Internet sites and stuff are generally not doing that at all, and so it's easy just to take a tiny piece of information and just blow it completely out of proportion. Or a lot of times on the internet, what we'll find is, a person has taken a message from something scholarly and interpreted it, and then they've interpreted it again and again and again until what you've gotten is a sort of nasty game of internet telephone and doesn't even begin to resemble what the original research was. And so I know you know about this too. In order to get more reads, so like everything that you read on the internet basically is paid for, right? It's paid for by advertising. That means that those people have an investment in you reading and coming back. So effectively they are marketing to you, and they'll do this with headlines, right? And they'll just give you a really grabby headline, and then it turns out that what they're talking about really isn't that. They'll write in a way that's very sort of sensationalized, just to sort of keep you coming back. They'll write in a way that's really short because you don't want to read very long on the internet, TLDR. But when they do that, they often miss a lot, and they present things in really unbalanced kind of ways. So making sure that the source that you're using is balanced. And then support. How reliable, accurate, reasonable, and well supported are those sources? It's very what do I want to say? Most of what you're reading is not going to be primary source material. It won't probably be very often that you're going to the actual journal articles of the researchers who actually did the study and reported on it. A lot of times you're reading something on Huffington Post or Harvard Business Review or something like that, even for this class, because that's easier to read. That's interpreting that for you. And so you're getting, secondary, tertiary kinds of sources rather than primary sources. So when you do that, when you look at something, you want to see that resource is going back to the original research, and it should do that in a way that makes it easy for you to find. So your Huffington Post article should tell you where that data came from. It should give you the names of the authors. It should link you direct back to that journal or something like that. That's, if you can't find that, if you can't find where did this information come from, then you need to be a little skeptical about it. So this is, obviously this is just a checklist for, classroom kinds of projects. So it's a good guide for figuring out if our informational sources are sort of credible and worth using. But I want to do something really interesting, and I'm going to do it on the next slide. So go ahead and flip it. Okay, so what I've done here is I've taken this, and in these white spaces on the right and in this blue font, what I've done is I've tried to apply these this checklist for evaluating informational sources and turn it into a way of evaluating also personal sources. Okay? So, for example, credibility. What is the person's relationship to you? Often, the closer a person is to you, the less reliable their information is, right? The closer they are, the more they think they know everything that's going on with you, the more likely they are to believe that whatever their personal experience is should matter to you or inform yours. So it's worth taking a look at who they are in relationship to you. What reasons do you have to trust their ideas? One of the really cool things about being a counselor is that, a mental health professional, is that we're trained not to put other people into our shoes, right? Not to use our own life experiences as the basis for what we tell other people. We learn about facilitating the change process, and that's what we do, rather than saying, oh, well, I have kids, and so you should listen to me about raising your kids. That is, I hope that you've already gotten this idea from Module 1, just a generally bad idea. So what reasons do you have to trust the person that you're talking to? I mean, if they don't have any training in that, if they're not helping you going through the problem-solving sort of method, if they're not doing some of the things that you are doing or are learning to do as a result of this class with people, if they're giving you advice, well, you need to think about how much that advice might actually apply to your life, right? They might have a great idea about parenting their own kids. Is that a great idea about parenting your kids? They might have a great idea about nutrition for their family. Does that mean necessarily that it's a good idea for your family? What training or experience do they have in the area of concern? Really, having gone through something like that, while that can be valuable, is usually not that valuable, honestly, right? I stopped eating and only ate pineapples for 4 months, and then I lost a lot of weight. It was great. You should try it. No, you probably shouldn't try it. And also, what if you're taking something like an MAOI or one of those other medications that doesn't like pineapple juice and stops working and kills you? So especially if you are going to really take seriously someone's ideas about something, and they're not just helping you to generate your own ideas, you really want them to have a lot of training or experience in whatever you're concerned about. And then, is this a one-time kind of deal? Are they somebody who's available to you that you can go back to? Stranger on a train is probably a less reliable source of information than somebody who knows that you're going to have to keep living with them for a long time. They're more likely to be cautious in the advice that they give you, maybe. So, accuracy. What is the recency of this person's information? So here's a good example of this. If you have kids and your kids are more than 12 months old, you should try this. You should just go to Target and look around in the baby section, because there is just new baby stuff all the time. All the time. So for example, that's maybe a good. It's cool if you have kids to hear what other people's experiences have been. But somebody, if you are making a baby registry, somebody who has had a baby in the last year is going to be a better source of information for you than somebody whose youngest child is 9, because they just won't know what's available. And then you can sort of take that out into the world. This is one of the reasons that, for example, teenagers a lot of times don't, with kind of a good reason, always buy into what their parents say. Your parent probably doesn't actually know how to interpret this emoji that you got from, this highly dramatic potential, romantic interest, as much as a friend does. Does what this person says agree with your other good sources? Even the Bible says, right, like test everything and hold on to the good. Don't just ask one person. If you're going to be getting information from people, get information from multiple sources and compare it. Compare the credibility of all of those sources and then see also if a lot of people are telling you the same thing. That way you don't sort of just get like one kind of crazy outlier, even if that person's really cool. You know, there's something about consensus, especially when it comes to, for example, how other people experience you, that it makes sense to get more than one opinion at a time. Is this person making logical sense, or are they doing that sneaky marketing thing themselves, probably not on purpose, just appealing to your or their emotions, right? Are they being reasonable? This is such a hard one, right? Because usually we are going to do this when we're stressed, when we're already kind of emotional. So we got to be real careful that the other person isn't also sort of getting all wrapped up in emotional concerns. And the closer they are to you, the bigger risk that is. And then again, how focused are they on you and your concern, as opposed to maybe what their stake is in it, or you know, what it would be like if they went through something like that. All of that. Reasonableness, is it fair and objective and such? What distorting motives might they have? If this is, you know, if this is your mom talking, and you know that your mom is, you know, suffering because the last kid has left the house and she's really lonely, and you're talking to her about whether or not you should take a job in, you know, 5 states away, or whether you should stay at the unhealthy job that you have now, she has a motive. Even if she doesn't want to, even if she's not trying to, she's going to have a lot of difficulty being objective with you. Again, one of the benefits to sort of having outside sources for some of this kind of stuff. Do they clearly have a lot of investment in the issue? Sometimes people just have a lot of investment in being right. Sometimes they'll have a lot of investment because they're involved in the decision that you're making. They'll have a lot of investment just because they care about you a lot. So checking that, because the more invested you are, again, the less objective. This is sort of similar to the other one. What do the other good sources say? Where does that person get their information from? Is it information just from their own life, or are they getting information from other sources that they can point you to? This is one of the ways that when we're in training to be counselors, we learn how, you know, how to know if what we're doing is like advising or psychoeducating, because advising is sort of what we think a person ought to do and telling them, and psychoeducating is saying this is what the research literature says is effective for most people in a similar kind of circumstance. And the way that we know whether we're advising or psychoeducating, which is the better one, is that we should always be able to say where that information comes from, right? So one good source should be able to point to other reliable sources. This is sort of fun to try. I'm obviously not actually there with you right now, but it could be cool if you haven't been doing this as you've been going along. Just think about the last person you asked for advice and who they were and what advice they gave, and just sort of go down this list and sort of see what it's like. So I couldn't really find a better resource for all of this, so I just wanted to offer you this, because information gathering is something that we do so often, and then also I just think this is something that'll be really helpful to you in your own life. So I hope it ends up being that way.